We are back again this week with Stephanie Dobson. Stephanie is a local lawyer and mediator here at Henke Divorce Law and Mediation in Lloydminster. And this is another episode of Healthy, Thriving Families in Two Homes. So Stephanie, today our subject is the division of assets and debts when it comes to separation or divorce. So let's start by talking about how this works for separating families.
Sure. So in Alberta and Saskatchewan, subject to certain exemptions, family property that is owned by either spouse or by spouses jointly is generally divided between them at the end of their relationship. So it's generally divided 50-50. So I've sort of broken it down into about 5 steps of what you do to divide up your assets and debts. So first, we're going to list everything. So all of the assets, all of the debts, and we'll go into it in a few moments, but what are the exemptions? Then second, we're going to value those items. Third, we're going to label which spouse plans on keeping each particular item. And then at the end, we're going to calculate the total of the value of what husband is keeping and then what the wife is keeping. And then at the bottom, we have a calculation, and we're going to see what that math looks like. And sometimes if that math creates a little bit of imbalance, we need to somehow balance it. Now, that balancing can either be by way of cash from one to the other, or it can be by way of transferring an asset from one person to the other.
So Stephanie, what types of assets and debts are considered family property?
Well, it's obviously impossible in our interview today to come up with a completely comprehensive list, but let's give a go at it. So some of the kinds of assets that we talk about, things like real estate, so your family home and other real estate holdings, corporate interests, bank accounts, investment accounts, kids' RESP accounts, collectibles, works of arts, or other valuable type of property. We even go into household contents, including not only the things that are in your house, but things that are in your garage, tools, equipment, things that are in your sheds, even life insurance policies that have a cash value. So then when we talk about the debts, debts are usually statement-based items. So things like credit cards, lines of credit, mortgages, car loans, other loans, even things like CRA debt or a bankruptcy debt is also considered family property that would be shared between the two of you.
Does it matter about the location of where the families live? Is it different if you live in Alberta or Saskatchewan?
Yes, in fact, all across Canada, the division of property legislation is provincially based. So in Alberta, there's a particular regime, and in Saskatchewan, there's a particular regime. However, in these two provinces, which is where I practice law, generally speaking, it's a 50-50 division of your assets and debts on separation. So the specifics of what gets divided and what's exempt have slightly different regimes in each province. So generally, if you live in Alberta, you use the Alberta legislation. And if you live in Saskatchewan, you use the Saskatchewan-based legislation. That's, of course, just a generality.
Are there things that aren't included, Stephanie, in the division of assets and debts?
Well, we touched on the word exemption a few moments ago. And so there are things that are specifically named in each of the Alberta and Saskatchewan legislation that are not to be divided between two separating spouses. And there are things that are to be partially divided only between two separating spouses. So each province has a different list of what's shareable and what's not shareable. The key to any we call it an exemption. So the key to any exemption is to make sure that you can trace that exemption from when you first got that item, when you first received that item or purchased that item, to where that item is today. Maybe it was you got money and then that money was used to buy a vehicle or a hot tub or a down payment on a house, and then that house was sold and then such and such happened. So it's that tracing that's really the key to keeping things out of your division of property.
Now, when couples are going through this process and they're looking to divide their property, does it matter if they are married or just living together? Is there a difference between those two statuses?
Well, before January 1st of 2020, there was a huge difference between the provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan as to how they treated married versus unmarried cohabitating people. So in Alberta, before January 1st, if you've separated before January 1st of 2020, we apply the law of what's called unjust enrichment. It's what I also call the it's not fair rules. So that means that generally speaking, if you lived like a married couple and you acted like a married couple and you used your finances and acquired property like a married couple, the it's not fair rule says it's not fair that you separate and one person gets to walk away with the bulk of the family property and the other walks away with nothing. So that's pre-January 1st of 2020. After that date, Alberta brought in legislation that allowed unmarried couples who are separating to divide up their assets and debts by law through the legislative authority. Now that's only available to what's called adult interdependent partners. Now that's of course a defined mouthful and it's a defined term within the legislation. If you fall within that category, you may be entitled to divide up your assets and debts just like if you're married. Now, on the flip side, in Saskatchewan, we are being on the border. We always have to look at both comparisons here. For a long time, it's been the law that both if you're married or if you've been living together in excess of 24 months, you get to divide your assets and debts just the same.
All right, Stephanie, a lot of good information in there. And thanks again for speaking with us. We will be back next week with more topics regarding separation and divorce. Thanks for joining us.
Perfect. Thanks, Stacey.